I walked in and he made two quick steps, which brought him into arm's length to me. I jerked Oswald back, trying to pull him behind me. When I jerked back on him, I turned his body. Instead of the bullet hitting him dead center, it hit him about 4 inches to the left of the navel on the left side.
You are about to embark upon the great crusade
to meet this mounting aggression.
And make no mistake about it, good will prevail.
I was born down in Red River County. That's southeast of Dallas area, and raised there until in my teens. And then my folks moved around quite a bit. We moved out to West Texas area and stayed 2 or 3 years, and then back to Red River County.
When did you join the Navy?
I was in 1940. I signed up in 1939 after I got out of school, and I missed the last year of my school in 37, 38. When I turned 17, I joined the Civilian Conservation Corps that Roosevelt had started, and I spent a year out in New Mexico in that, and then I came back, and that was in 37, and I came back in 39 and went my last year of school, and then I signed up for the Navy, or put my name in. At that time, they was having trouble getting enough recruits for a company to send through training, so I had to wait a while, and I don't remember what month it was. It was in the early part of 1940.
And when were you stationed at Pearl Harbor first?
Well, I never was stationed there. We just went in and out of there because I was aboard ship. When I first went in there, I was assigned to a destroyer, and the destroyer was assigned to one of the aircraft carriers, because they had two destroyers that escorted those carriers around, one on either side, wherever they went. And of course, the way we helped them at that time was, since the war wasn't on, when we'd go out to sea, the pilots would like to practice landing and taking off and landing on that flat top, and we would just cruise along beside them, because sometimes their tail hook would miss that hook that they catch to stop them, and quite often they would go over the side on one side or the other. And our job was we stayed in pretty close to them if they went overside. We had a boat that was hung out over the side of the ship, and you could trip a trigger and it dropped that boat right into the water immediately. And the time that boat hit the water, the motor was already running, and there was 2 men aboard it, and they would run to where that airplane landed and pick up the pilot. We never lost a pilot, but we did lose a ship or plane a couple times. But we never did lose a pilot.
Well, let's go to the morning of Sunday, December 7th. Where were you, and how did you learn what was happening?
Well, I was aboard ship, and it happened just a few minutes before 8 o'clock, and I don't know, somebody had wrote down that it was 7:58 or something like that, but I didn't know. I didn't look at the clock, so it didn't make any difference. But they had just served breakfast on there, and everybody and it's on a Sunday. They couldn't have picked a better day to do it, because we get paid twice a month, and the day before was our payday. So everybody's getting ready to go and spend their $12 or $15 that they got. I was getting $30 a month at that time, and of course I get $15 of it at that deal. We called ourselves rich on payday. It didn't last long, but then I'd say half the fleet was getting ready to go ashore after that. I was planning on going later that day, but not then. And the shore boats didn't leave. You couldn't until 8 o'clock. That's the earliest any of those ships could send out their boats. carrying the sailors over to the dock for them to catch a bus into town. And there was several of them ready to go. But I've often thought that it would have been quite a worse deal if they had just waited a few minutes longer, because that bay all those ships had the same deal. They didn't leave till 8 o'clock. So they'd had all these boats headed into the shore loaded with sailors, our Marines, if they was on a ship that had carried Marines. And but fortunately it had just a few inches before they were left. And of course everybody was able to man their battle stations.
So where did you go as soon as you?
Mine was on. I was a loader on that 4-inch gun that shot 30 miles. If you got in a battle with other ships and things like that, that's what that was for. So I never fired a lot. We loaded it and had it ready, but it was useless to fire at planes a half a mile up with a gun like that. If I had fired it back in the direction where the planes were from our ship, it would have landed somewhere in Honolulu over there. But so I never fired a shot. So I told myself I can't claim any victory on Pearl Harbor Day because I didn't fire anything.
And we're about now to discuss the other major historical event in American history that he was a part of.
I eventually went to work for the federal government as an auditor, auditing accounts for them, and then I saw an ad by the Dallas Police Department for police officers, and I went down and signed up and took their examination. And fortunately, I think I passed. Out of the 15 or 20 or so that took the test, I think I ended up being number 2 or 3 on it. So I felt good about that, and I went to work in 1950 with the Dallas Police Department. While I was with the homicide division, we had a lot of different things happen, but in 1963, when the President Kennedy come for a visit, he was assassinated, and one of the things that happened after his assassination was Oswald, who had shot the president, made his way to Oak Cliff, and he was stopped on the street because he's walking along at a pretty fast clip, and Officer J.D. Tippit stopped him and to question him, something that back in my years earlier, I'd done it many, many times. You'd stop somebody because you're looking for someone, and they had given him a general description of what Oswald looked like that they had from the people that saw him in the window when the shots were fired. So he stopped and just merely questioned him about what his name and so forth. But I had 4 good witnesses that was a witness to the shooting of Tippit, and all of them gave about the same description. That they said that when Tippit pulled up on the side of the street there and called Oswald over, he was driving along about 10 miles an hour. Actually, that wasn't his beat, because they took the man called the man out on that beat and worked downtown, and they called Tippit in from the outlying area to cover that particular area. So he just pulled him over, and I'd done the same thing many times. I'd looking for somebody, and I'd see somebody walking along the street that resembled him. I would stop them and talk to them, and of course 99 times out of 100 you sent them on the way because they wasn't who you're looking for. That's what would have happened with Tippit. Had Oswald been able to think long enough about it, because Tippit had called him over to the car door, and he leaned in and talked to him, they said, for a few seconds, and then Tippit got out and started walking around the front of the car to get to him, and Oswald stepped back 2 or 3 feet, and when Tippit got to the left front fender of the car, Oswald pulled out his pistol and went into that Marine stance that he'd been taught, and then just bang, 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 bang 4 times. just like that. He didn't move his gun up and down. He had left it steady. And so the first shot that hit Tippit was low along the belt area, and the next one's a little higher. And what caused it? What he did is he went forward with the first shot, and he started turning to his left, and the bullet walked on up his body as he fell. And the last one, when he was going down, he fell on his left side, and as he went down on the left, on there, his head passed the line of view, line of shots, and the bullet hit him in the temple and come out the top. Now we have a lot of conspiracy people saying that Oswald walked around the car, back of the car, very nonchalant-like, and shot him in the temple because of the direction of the bullet. Well, I served as a technical advisor for Oliver Stone when he made the JFK movie, and when he come to that, we had a little discussion about it. He wanted to write that Oswald, some idiot had said that Oswald just casually walked around the car and shot him in the head, because that's the only way they'd had that bullet going at an angle through his head. But I told Stone, I said, that ain't the way it happened. And so I said, that when Oswald finished up, he turned to run. He run by the porch where the Davis sisters were standing and kicked the empty holes out of his gun. And I passed a cab driver over there that had a clear view of it. And as he passed that, he said to himself, the poor dumb cop or the poor damn cop. The driver wasn't sure what he said. But that told me that Oswald had no intention of shooting that officer. He just didn't know what, if he'd just been using his head a little bit and gave Tippit his identification and everything, Tippit would have looked at it and passed him on. But Oswald wasn't thinking fast enough to do that. And that's what happened there. And then he went on up, he took off, and as he's running across the parking area there, a lot that didn't have any cars on it to speak of, and there was a used car lot down on the corner and of that block, and that man that owned it and his tenant that worked him there, they run out and they saw Oswald with the pistol still in his hand and running across there, and he had a tan jacket on, and he was smart enough to know that if he got described, they'd describe that he was wearing a tan jacket. So he took that jacket off and tried to throw it underneath the car as he went by. And of course, with their information, we recovered the jacket, and then Marina later identified the jacket as his. So, and then he went up Jefferson Street, and then I guess he saw two police cars coming, and he turned into a shoe store and pretended to be looking at shoes, except the shoe store owner didn't have any customers. He's standing in the back of his store listening to all this going on the radio, because every radio and every TV was covered with it. And he saw Oswald come in and pretend to be looking at shoes, but he's looking over his left shoulder, and these two police cars went by, and then he walked out to the sidewalk area and looked both ways and then headed west again. So that made him suspicious, and he followed him. And when he got up to the Texas Theater, instead of buying a ticket, he just darted in the door, went in and sat down. So the shoe store man, he told the ticket seller there, he said, I think the man that shot the officer just went in here. He said, you ought to call the police. So they called, and the rest is history, because they swarmed on there and arrested him, and he tried to fight with them, but they overpowered him, brought him in. So he was brought in as a suspect in the killing of Tippit. He wasn't brought in for the president deal yet. And consequently, when I come in and was assigned to him, I actually went out to where Tippit was shot and then tried to go to the theater, but the traffic was such I couldn't get there. And I called the dispatcher and told them to tell them to take him to my office and I'd meet him there. So, but they were driving a marked car and I was driving a plain car, and they got there ahead of me. When I got in, he was sitting in an interrogation room by himself. And so I walked in and sat down and started talking to him. And about Tippit, I didn't mention the president because I had no idea he was going to be a suspect in that too. And I had him some 10 or 15 minutes, maybe 20 at the most, before Captain Fritz came back from the school book depository where he and the other officers had been searching. Of course, when they went into the school book depository, they went in expecting to find a stranger. They wasn't looking for an employee. But when they didn't find no stranger, then he asked the Mr. Truly, the manager, to do a head count. Well, Oswald was the only one missing, and Captain said, I want to talk to that man, give me his address. So they gave him his address and everything, but he had given them a phony address. He didn't live there, so they went out there. So the cap come in and in a flurry and was gathering up people to go send different directions to look for him from the best information he could gather. And somebody in the office there said, the captain, the man Leavelle's talking to has got a name similar to that, because he had told him he wanted to look for somebody named Oswald. And that shows you how closely they was paying attention to the prisoners that brought in. And so Cap come to the door and opened it and asked me what his name was, and I told him, and then he asked Oswald, I said, where do you work? He said, at the school book depository. The captain says, you're the man I want. So I lost my prisoner. The captain took over, and I never questioned him any further. But I already had pretty good information from him as it was to help me. But he was assigned to me as my prisoner, therefore everything that took place went through me. And when we was transferring him, it was still since he was my prisoner, it was up to me to head up the moving. And that's what I did, and that's how I come out to be handcuffed. That was one question that's been asked quite a bit. Why was I handcuffed to him? But he was my prisoner. He was assigned to me.
And when Ruby stepped forward?
Yeah, as we walked into the basement down there on the transfer, I saw Ruby. He was facing me about 5 or 6 feet away. And I always make it a habit when I go into a room where I'm doing an investigation, I always look up and down the people that I see. And I saw Jack Ruby. He was standing right there in front, and he had the pistol in his left hand, holding it against his left leg right tight. And of course, I knew immediately what was going to happen when I saw that. None of the police officers filled in that area or the newspaper people saw that pistol in his hand. Of course, I gave them a bad time later on, all of them. I said, if y'all had been looking sharp enough, you'd look and saw him with that pistol, you could have wrestled him down there and you could have been heroes. But as it is, you left it for me to to confront him. So just as I walked in, and he made 2 quick steps, which brought him into arm's length to me, and I reached over past Oswald, caught him by the left shoulder and was pushing back. But he had switched the pistol over to his right hand and shot. And of course, I jerked Oswald back, trying to pull him behind me. So when I jerked back on him, I turned his body. Instead of the bullet hitting him dead center, it hit him about 4 inches to the left of the navel on the left side, and went through the stomach and cut the vena cava in the back, and went over through the left or the right side, hit the liver, took a chunk out of that, and then cut one of the main arteries over on the right side, and hit the end of the 7th rib and shattered it, and glanced off, and landed about 3 or 4 inches to the right, almost even with where it went in on the right side. In fact, if it hadn't been for that rib catching that bullet, if it had missed it, it'd come on and hit me in the side over here. But it hit that rib and bounced off. And when I examined him later on, I could roll that bullet around underneath the skin just like that with my thumb and finger. So when I got him to the hospital, they called an ambulance right away, and there happened to be one that was returning to their office from a call, and they accepted the call and come up there. So they were there very shortly. When I got him to the hospital out there and rolled him into the operating room, the doctors was already there, ready to go. And I told him, I said, before you do anything else, I want that bullet out of him. So and I showed them where it was, and they just pinched it up and hit it with a scalpel, and it popped out into a tray that our nurse was holding. I wiped it off with some Kleenex or something, and took my pocket knife and had a sharp knife point on it, and I gave it to the nurse that was holding the tray. And I told her, I said, I want you to scratch your initial on the butt end of this bullet, because you and I, somewhere down the line, is going to be testifying that this is a bullet come out of Oswald. And she did that, and I testified 2 or 3 times. I know she did once, but I tested about 2 or 3 different times when they was having hearings on Ruby. I then returned to the office but it made up the case report for filing on him for the murder. Of course, what I did was just file a deal for the grand jury to look at, because he's dead, so you can't do anything better. But I did. I felt like they needed to hear it, so they did indict Ruby for murder, and we tried him the following year and got the death penalty on him. But the Court of Criminal Appeals overturned it and sent it back for a retrial. It seems like that the judge that was hearing the case was writing a book about the trial, and they were afraid that he would use some decision, make some decision in the favor of his book rather than the prisoner. I don't know that he would do it, but the obvious would be there. It might be what happened. So they overturned it, and I think it's a proper thing to do that they did. And we reset him for trial in February the 10th of 1967. And he died on January the 4th or 5th of 1967 of cancer that he had developed while in jail.